They tried to ban me from working in my own home, threatened me with fines, and attempted to control my life. But I found a loophole in their rules, proved them wrong, and destroyed the HOA. Alex had always dreamed of working for himself. After years in a corporate office, he finally got the chance to transition to remote work and set up a home office. His job required nothing more than a computer, an internet connection, and peace and quiet. He didn't have clients coming over, didn't hold meetings, and didn't make any noise. He simply sat at his desk, completed his tasks, and enjoyed the fact that he no longer had to waste time commuting. Life was peaceful until one morning when he opened his mailbox and found an envelope with the HOA logo. Inside was an official notice printed on thick paper. Violation notice number 7621, address 184 Oakwood Drive. Violation: unauthorized commercial activity in a residential area. Required action: immediate cessation of home-based work. Fine: $3,000 for violating community regulations. Alex read the notice several times. What commercial activity? He wasn't running a store, didn't have customers visiting, and wasn't holding business meetings. All he did was work on his computer from his own home. He figured this had to be a misunderstanding, so he called the HOA office to clarify. A representative answered quickly, but their tone was excessively formal, as if they were reading from a script. Operating a business from home violates the established HOA guidelines, they explained in a monotone voice. I'm not running a business, Alex interrupted. I'm just working remotely. I'm not bothering anyone. If your activity generates income, it is considered commercial use of residential property, which is prohibited by the community bylaws, came the dry response. Alex was speechless. This was absurd. In today's world, thousands of people worked from home, especially after the pandemic, yet the HOA was seriously trying to ban him from earning money in his own home. This has to be a mistake. Where exactly does it say remote work is prohibited? You can review the rules on the HOA website. The conversation ended, leaving Alex feeling like he had just talked to a brick wall. The HOA wasn't even trying to assess his situation. They just wanted to control his life. Right after the call, he went to the HOA's website and began carefully reviewing the community regulations. Among the mountain of bureaucratic language, he found a clause stating that using residential property for commercial purposes is prohibited. But there were no specific details about remote work without in-person clients. If the HOA's logic applied, any remote job would be banned, even if someone was simply sitting with a laptop writing articles or coding. Alex could feel his anger rising. This wasn't just ridiculous. It was a blatant abuse of power. But the most interesting part? He knew several neighbors who also worked from home, software engineers, accountants, even a couple of lawyers. Yet none of them had received fines. Why was the HOA targeting him specifically? Something wasn't right, and he was going to find out exactly what was going on. Alex knew that one letter wouldn't be the end of it. The HOA was used to pressuring residents with fines, threats, and bureaucracy, expecting people to give up and comply. But he wasn't about to submit to ridiculous demands, especially when they had no legal basis. The next day, he found another envelope from the HOA in his mailbox. Inside was an updated notice. Fine increased to $5,000 for failure to comply. Further refusal to cease activity may result in additional actions, including legal proceedings. Now the HOA was threatening him with a lawsuit if he didn't stop working. This was beyond absurd. Alex decided to investigate whether he was the only victim. He knew many people in his neighborhood worked remotely. His neighbor across the street was a web developer, and the woman next door was an accountant who consulted clients over Zoom. But when he started asking around, none of them had received similar notices. At first, people were hesitant to talk, but eventually they admitted that they, too, were afraid of the HOA. Many had already dealt with their aggressive enforcement tactics, ridiculous parking fines, demands to repaint doors, and orders to remove flower pots from porches. But no one had ever heard of a work-from-home ban. This felt like a targeted attack against him. But why? The next day, as he pulled into his driveway, he noticed 2 HOA representatives standing in front of his house, taking pictures of his windows. He walked up to them. "Can I help you with something?" he asked. The man in the HOA-branded shirt quickly put his phone away. "We're simply documenting the condition of the home," he said. "You are in violation of community regulations, and we are required to keep records." Alex stared at him coldly. "I work on my computer inside my house. How does that violate any rule?" "We have reason to believe you are using residential property for commercial purposes," the other man replied. "The HOA cannot allow that." Alex chuckled. "So, should I sign a statement promising not to earn money while inside my own home?" They didn't answer. Instead, they turned and walked away. But Alex's frustration only grew. The HOA wasn't just fining him. They were watching him. That night, he sat at his desk and started digging deeper into the HOA regulations. After several hours of research, he found exactly what he was looking for. The community bylaws stated that working from home was prohibited only if it created disturbances for neighbors, such as excessive noise, heavy traffic, or frequent visitors. But Alex had none of those. No clients, no deliveries, no disruptions. This meant he was fully within the rules. The HOA had completely fabricated the ban, hoping he would cave like so many others. But now, he was armed with their own regulations. They wanted to push him into a corner? Now, he was going to fight back. Alex spent the entire night studying the HOA bylaws and state laws governing homeowners' rights. The deeper he dug, the clearer it became. The HOA had no legal authority to stop him from working remotely. The rules explicitly stated that only certain types of businesses were prohibited, such as noisy workshops, repair services, private medical offices, retail stores, or offices with a steady stream of clients. His work didn't fall under any of these categories. He worked alone at his computer, had no meetings, made no noise, and didn't bring strangers into the neighborhood. That meant he wasn't violating any rules. HOA was simply abusing its power to exert control. But the most important discovery came from state law. It clearly stated that homeowners associations could not enforce bans on remote work unless it physically affected the environment or neighbors. That was the key. The HOA wasn't just overstepping its authority. It was actively violating state law. Now, Alex had everything he needed to strike back. Before making his next move, he decided to investigate why the HOA had singled him out in the first place. He reached out to a longtime resident named Gary, who had lived in the community for over 20 years and had his own past conflicts with the HOA. When Alex explained his situation, Gary sighed. "Alex, do you know who runs the HOA?" Alex had never paid much attention to the board, but he knew the president's name, Evelyn Marsh, a middle-aged woman with a reputation for obsessive control. "Evelyn hates change," Gary continued. "She thinks that if people start working from home, they'll become independent from the HOA. She's afraid it'll lead to chaos in the neighborhood." Alex frowned. "That still doesn't explain why they're targeting me specifically." Gary smirked. "Have you checked where Evelyn's son works?" Curious, Alex opened his laptop and started searching. Within minutes, he found a LinkedIn profile. Evelyn's son, Mark Marsh, worked for a major commercial real estate firm that leased office spaces in the area. Now it all made sense. The HOA wasn't enforcing a rule. They were protecting a business interest. Evelyn was abusing her power to force people into renting office space instead of working from home. This was corruption at its finest. Alex realized he now had more than just a legal argument. He had leverage. He had evidence of a conflict of interest that could destroy the HOA's credibility. The next day, he filed an official complaint with the city council, attaching copies of state laws and HOA bylaws, proving that their demands were illegal. But he didn't stop there. He also reached out to a journalist who had previously covered HOA abuses. A few days later, the local newspaper published an article. HOA president uses power to ban remote work, conflict of interest. The article exposed how Evelyn Marsh was illegally using HOA regulations to push people toward commercial office spaces, while her son's company profited from the policy. It was the first major blow. But Alex knew the HOA wouldn't go down without a fight. The real battle was about to begin in court. After the newspaper article, the HOA faced immense pressure. Residents were furious, and even local officials had started looking into their actions. But Alex knew they wouldn't back down so easily. He was right. 2 days later, another HOA letter arrived in his mailbox. This time, it was an official threat of legal action. They accused him of violating community standards and refusing to comply with their orders. But the most shocking part was at the bottom of the letter. It warned that continuous conflicts with the HOA could affect his property rights, implying that if he didn't stop fighting back, they might attempt to force him out of his home. It was a blatant act of intimidation. Alex wasn't surprised. This was the HOA's last-ditch effort. They always relied on fear to keep people in line. They assumed he'd be too afraid of losing his home to continue resisting. But now, he wasn't fighting alone. He reached out to his attorney, Lisa Harper, a specialist in lawsuits against homeowners associations. "They think they can scare you," Lisa said after reading the letter. "But you know what? Now they're the ones breaking the law." She laid out 3 key violations. HOAs cannot ban remote work unless it disrupts the neighborhood. Threatening a homeowner's property rights without legal grounds is illegal coercion. Using HOA rules for personal gain is a conflict of interest that could lead to criminal charges. Lisa drafted a formal lawsuit against the HOA demanding the immediate cancellation of all fines, a legal ruling that their work-from-home ban was invalid, financial compensation for emotional distress caused by their harassment. But they didn't stop there. Lisa also submitted a formal request to the district attorney to investigate the HOA's financial records, looking for potential fraud. Now, the HOA was trapped in their own web of lies. A week later, the first court hearing was held. The courtroom was packed, not only with lawyers and HOA representatives, but also residents who were fed up with the HOA's corruption. The HOA's lawyer tried to argue that the board was simply enforcing community rules and that Alex had unknowingly violated regulations. But Lisa shut them down instantly. "Your Honor," she said, handing the judge a stack of documents, "the HOA fined my client for illegal commercial activity. However, their own bylaws do not prohibit remote work unless it disturbs the community. My client has never disrupted his neighbors in any way." The judge examined the documents. "Is this true?" he asked the HOA's lawyer. The attorney hesitated. Lisa wasn't finished. "Furthermore," she continued, placing another stack of evidence on the table, "we have discovered that the HOA president, Evelyn Marsh, has a personal financial interest in banning remote work. Her son works for a commercial leasing company that benefits from forcing residents into office spaces." The courtroom fell silent. The judge narrowed his eyes. "That is a very serious accusation." The HOA's lawyer stammered something about upholding architectural integrity. But it was over. After several hours of arguments, the judge issued a preliminary ruling. The HOA fines were illegal and revoked. The HOA had no authority to ban remote work. A financial audit of the HOA was ordered to investigate possible misconduct. Alex knew this was the beginning of the end for the HOA's reign of terror. But there was still one final step. The HOA was still clinging to power, and now he was about to finish them off for good. After the court ruling declared the HOA fines illegal, the association descended into chaos. They could no longer hide their shady dealings behind formalities, and now residents were starting to ask questions. But instead of admitting defeat, the HOA board tried one last desperate move. A couple of days after the trial, Alex found yet another letter in his mailbox. Urgent notice of case review. The HOA board has decided to conduct an internal review and make a final determination regarding your status as a community resident. You are invited to a hearing where your case will be discussed. This was their last-ditch attempt to hold on to power. The HOA was betting that if they gathered enough loyal residents, they could override the court's decision through a collective vote. But they had overlooked one critical detail. Alex now had the full support of the community. On the day of the meeting, the room was packed. But this time, everything was different. In the past, residents had been too afraid to speak out against the HOA. But now, knowing that their leader had abused her position for personal gain, people were finally demanding answers. When Evelyn Marsh stood up to announce the review of Alex's supposed violation, she was immediately met with angry shouts from the crowd. "Why are you talking about a violation when the court already ruled in his favor? Where is our money, Evelyn? Is it true that your son profits from commercial office rentals?" She tried to calm the crowd, but it was too late. Finally, someone proposed a vote to dissolve the HOA board entirely. Before Evelyn could say anything, residents started casting their votes. By the end of the night, 87% of homeowners had voted for the immediate removal of the entire HOA board. It was over. Within a week, Evelyn and the rest of the HOA leadership resigned in disgrace. But that wasn't the end of it. Following Alex's lawsuit, city officials launched a full investigation into the HOA's financial activities. A month later, the findings were made public. Tens of thousands of dollars in resident fines had been misused, not for community improvements, but for the personal benefit of the HOA board. Evelyn Marsh was officially charged with abuse of power and conflict of interest. Alex watched everything unfold, feeling a deep sense of pride and relief. He had started this fight simply to defend his right to work from home. But in the end, he didn't just win the case, he dismantled an entire corrupt system. Now no one could ban residents from remote work, issue bogus fines, or threaten homeowners with eviction over fake violations. Sitting at his desk once again, in the living room that had always been his rightful office, Alex smiled. They thought they could control him, but in the end, they were the ones who lost everything.